Hello and welcome to It's a Code U, mental health support for those working in healthcare. This is a podcast created for healthcare employees to explore not only issues relating to mental and emotional health, but also unique challenges that those working in healthcare are faced with. Your hosts are Adina Tucker, a licensed clinical social worker with Dartmouth Health, and Jennifer Hinsey, an MSW also with Dartmouth Health. We all have a junk drawer. One of those, usually mine's in the kitchen, that's filled with all sorts of things like a treasure trove of fast food straws, batteries, and birthday candles. What about even piles of mail that you haven't gone through? Or do you have a clothes chair or a bench in your bedroom where you pile clothes on top and then you search through for whatever you're looking for? Do you have a kitchen table or an island that you can't even see anymore? This episode, we are going to take a look at the psychology of clutter, how it can affect your mental health, how to recognize if you have a larger issue, and action steps for how to make improvements. We do want to note that everyone deals with a certain amount of clutter in their lives, and the purpose of this episode is to look at the connection between the amount of clutter you have and how it might be affecting your mental health. The things we will share are taken from evidence-based research, and we will put the links to the research in the show description for anyone who'd like to get more information and dig a little deeper. And while it might not seem like it, there is a connection between clutter and our mental health. For some of us, it can make you feel overwhelmed. And I know, speaking just for myself, when there is a lot of clutter, I get this feeling of like uncontrolled chaos, and I start to feel anxious until I can sort through some of it and make things neater. And clutter can have an impact in a negative way on our mental health. It causes issues in our relationships. If we have varying degrees of what we're comfortable with in terms of clutter, it can increase our stress and even make it hard for some of us to focus. So, just in case you're wondering what is considered clutter, I will define it for you. Clutter is items that are strewn about in a disorganized way. It's usually stuff that people acquire over time and may not even use, but they also don't get rid of it. And now we can also have digital clutter. And I definitely have digital clutter. I think I have like 12,000 emails in my personal email that are not read. And digital clutter is emails we never go through or files that are saved haphazardly. I'm guessing that means like on your desktop instead of neatly categorized in a folder or something like that.
I'm all too familiar with the kitchen drawer clutter. In fact, I think I have like 2 kitchen drawers dedicated to clutter. They are so cluttered. They're so cluttered, I probably have emails in those kitchen drawers. That's how cluttered they are. But let's take a little quiz to see if you might have little clutter in your home. Do you own things that you never use or need? Maybe clothes that no longer fit or that you just never wear? Or old devices that may not even work anymore, like an iPod? That junk drawer we were just mentioning, do you have one or 2? Have you ever lost items in your house and then just bought new ones to replace them? Are you unable to get to certain places in your house because it's blocked with things or boxes? Does the mess in your house keep you from having people over? So while it's true that clutter can negatively impact our mental health, some people are more affected by it than others. If you're someone who really likes things to be neat, or maybe you're a perfectionist, then you might be more stressed out when you have clutter in your home than someone a little less particular about their environment. Interestingly, a study published in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin found that women who had more clutter in their homes also had higher levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And they had that throughout the day than women who generally had less clutter. And another study found that clutter contributed to the feeling of household chaos, which was found to be associated with worsening parenting, feelings of stress, and negative emotions.
I will first say that I have a lot of scissors because I will lose my scissors, especially in a crafting area, and I will get frustrated by another pair. So at one time, I had like 5 pairs of scissors. So I definitely checked that one off. But I think in regards to what you just said, I think something important to note is that I don't think the research is saying that if you have clutter in your home, you're a bad parent. I believe that the takeaway is more that because of the added stress from having clutter, you may feel like you have a shorter fuse. That's the way that I interpreted that. So, days when I've myself been stressed, especially when my kids were little and maybe the house had gotten out of control with clutter, I might be more quick to react or to become more easily frustrated during those times. And I just felt like it was important to give some context in case someone is listening and thinking that we're saying, clutter equals bad parenting. I don't believe that's the case. There are other ways that clutter can affect our mental health and emotional health. And one is that it can cause us to have difficulty focusing because we can only focus on so many things at one time. If we're surrounded by clutter, it can actually make it harder for us to focus on a task. So, if you're someone who is a remote worker, this can be something that could affect your ability to think clearly as you work. If you're prone to procrastination, the research tells us that your home being cluttered may make it worse. Or if you don't typically procrastinate, your home being cluttered could be a reason you begin to procrastinate because having to search through piles of things to find the one thing you're looking for quickly could be very overwhelming and because cause you to become frustrated and then just start to procrastinate dealing with certain things. Clutter can also cause difficulty with relationships. If the other person tends to accumulate clutter and not deal with it, that could become a source of resentment and annoyance in the relationship. You may also be avoiding inviting friends over because of the amount of clutter in your home. And this could lead you to feeling socially isolated or even shame over the condition of your home. And if that continued and the feeling of loneliness increases, it could begin to take a toll on your mental health. And a little interesting factoid that I saw was that there was a study that looked at the intersection between someone's perceptions of facial expressions and background clutter. And they looked at movies and different shots in movies. And what they found was if the faces are smaller on the screen and there's a lot of background clutter, then it's difficult for people to figure out the emotion on the face. So, this study was about movies and about how different objects and shots and the closeness of the faces affected the ability of someone to read emotions. But it is interesting to think about how this would maybe translate to our ability to understand our partners or those we live with if we're distracted by the things around us because there's so much clutter.
Very interesting. And clutter might even affect our appetite. One study found that being in a cluttered environment triggered the participants to engage in unhealthy eating, suggesting that controlling impulses could become more difficult if your environment feels chaotic. Something else to consider is that clutter in your home can cause you to feel this constant frustration trying to just move through your day completing tasks. You may spend more time looking for things or organizing because of the amount of items you have, and that time could be spent elsewhere if you had less to wade through around you. For older adults in particular, research has shown that clutter decreases life satisfaction. And another study found that when older adults received assistance in figuring out ways to straighten up and get rid of clutter, it helped them to feel more in control of their lives and accomplished.
I know I always feel more accomplished when I get rid of stuff and things look nice and neat. I feel like I really did something, really went the distance with my clutter. So, one thing that's becoming apparent after looking at just a little bit of that is that probably everybody has a little bit of clutter. Even if you just have a junk drawer and you manage to keep everything else in your life clutter free, likely we all have a little bit of clutter. But why do we hold on to things we don't need anymore and allow our homes and lives become cluttered? And that's a question I've asked myself. But there are a few different reasons why people hang on to things. It can be overwhelming to go through old things and get rid of them. You may not know where to start, or it may just feel like an impossible feat. There's also the whole sentimental value of things. So, certain things we have remind us of people or memories or something that we want to be mindful of, like certain goals we have for ourselves. And one reason I've heard from a lot of people is feeling guilty about getting rid of something because it was a gift from someone they love or loved, especially if it's something that belonged to someone who's passed away. So, letting go can be very hard. Sometimes keeping things around that keep us connected to memories of people is how we stay connected to those who are no longer in our lives. And people can find their belongings to be comforting. So, getting rid of things that you've attached a sense of security to can be very difficult.
Makes a lot of sense. Interestingly, those who have been diagnosed with ADHD and have more of the inattentiveness seem to struggle more with clutter. In fact, a study in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease found that approximately 28% to 32% of individuals with ADHD, and especially the inattentive subtype, have been reported to have clinically significant hoarding. So it seems clutter is something that is a struggle for those dealing with ADHD, but also it can co occur in those with hoarding issues. And we will get into the differences between clutter and hoarding right now. Some of you may be thinking that we're talking about hoarding, and there is a distinction between having a cluttered environment and suffering from a true hoarding disorder. Hoarding disorder is a psychiatric condition. It's marked by an inability to get rid of things. Those who suffer from hoarding disorder may suffer distress at even the thought of getting rid of things. Someone who hoards can show any of the following: cramped and cluttered living spaces. Maybe there's an entire room or parts of their home that may be inaccessible due to the amount of items they've accumulated. Non functional spaces. So, for example, maybe their bed is covered in items, so they have to sleep in a chair or in a completely different room. They probably don't see any issues with their clutter. Even if they go stay somewhere else, they might start to accumulate things there as well. They have a hard time throwing things away and may get upset, defensive at even the thought of throwing stuff away. There's a lot of trash or food, creating unsanitary conditions. Hoarding can be co occurring with other conditions, as well as obsessive compulsive disorder and ADHD.
Now that we've looked at what clutter is, how it affects our mental health, and the difference between clutter and hoarding, let's start to talk about how we can remove some of the clutter we have. It is worth noting that if you're deciding to get rid of clutter and start to get organized, you may experience some anxiety and even depressive symptoms. And if this happens, you may want to seek the support of a mental health therapist to help you process what's going on. It could be something deeper that you need to dig around in a little bit. As you get started on decluttering things, the first thing you might want to do is set aside a specific time. I like to declutter once a year, but I also break it up into sections. It's funny because I am type A and I was thinking that, and then now I'm saying it. So I am a little type A, but I feel like it helps me stay organized and not get overwhelmed by it. So I'll usually go around the house and see what areas seem to need to be kind of decluttered and organized. And then I make a, a list. This feels like a confession. I'll make a list of the places I want to clean out and declutter. And then I pick one space at a time. And then, depending on how much stuff I need to go through or how big the space is, I might break that space into a few different sessions to get through one area. So, for example, maybe I say, okay, I'm going to do, I don't know, 30 minutes every Saturday and Sunday. And maybe one area takes me like an hour. And so that's kind of how I do it. But I do have a lot of clutter. So I'm not perfect for sure. That's not what I'm saying. It also helps if once you've decided on how you're going to tackle things, you have a process for figuring out what to do with anything. So there's a lot of television shows that have started over the last few years where people do this. But one easy way is dividing things into different groups. So things you want to keep, things you'll give away or donate, and then things you may want to sell. and then trash. And so trash is going to be anything that's expired or broken. And a good way to think about items is if you haven't used something in a year, get rid of it. And if you're on the fence about something, and this is something I read somewhere a long time ago when I was struggling getting rid of kid things when they were small, was I took a bin and stuff that I was unsure about, I put it in the bin, put it in the attic, and then if I didn't go through it in 6 months, I would just get rid of everything in there without looking at it. And most of the time you forget it's in there, and then there you go. But something that can help once you start to declutter is to then organize the things that are left so you don't spend time searching for things later on. It also make things look less chaotic and easier to find. There's a ton of books and TV shows about organizing and strategies for doing that. And yeah, I won't go on and on about that because I definitely could. I have a basket problem. I'll admit that. This is just my confessions today about clutter. I have a basket problem, and that probably is because then it doesn't feel like clutter if it's in a basket. But it also, I feel like, helps me keep things grouped together. So, specifically for the pantry area and with 3 teenagers, it is easier to have baskets with labels so that we all know where the things go. So that's my helpful tidbit.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, that's great. That's great tips. That's excellent. I love baskets, as long as your baskets don't become boxes. Well, those are some really helpful tips. I think a lot of people can make great use of those. And so let's talk about once you've cleaned and decluttered and you've gotten your space organized to your liking, probably going to want to try and maintain that. And that can be as easy as starting to give yourself a timer at the end of the day to just straighten up, put things where they're supposed to go. You can also make it a new habit to check and see if you already have something before you buy more of that item or a new one, whatever it might be. And also remember to have some self compassion, especially if you start to feel bad about how you let your space and home get with the amount of clutter. And if you find that you're having trouble getting rid of things once you decide to try, seek some support from a mental health professional. There could be things that are coming up for you that you need to work through.
This is something, it was when you were mentioning checking to see if you have something before you buy it. And I started doing this because I already mentioned the scissors, but I started buying things as far as like grocery shopping and like paper towels and whatever that I already had too many of because I would get confused. So there was
Mm.
a period of time where what I was running out of was toilet paper, but I kept buying paper towels and not just like one roll, but like a big 6-pack roll. So I had like 18 paper towels or something, and then like one roll of toilet paper because I wasn't paying attention. But something that I do now when I'm like writing out my grocery list is if I know that I need like something for recipe and I'm not sure if I have it, I'll just write it at the top of my paper, like in the corner. And then I know to go check for everything that's on that list before I leave. That way I don't buy, because I used to do that a
Hmm.
lot. I used to buy lots of the same spices and then none of what I actually needed because I couldn't remember. So
Yeah. Well, that's a good trick, you know? That's a real good, that makes a lot of sense. I was thinking too about the like a scarcity mindset and how that can lead to just holding on to a lot of things. So my husband and I, we live on this farm now. It used to be a farm. We're not farming it, but we haven't been here too long, less than a year, and we there's so much stuff just left over, clutter in like outbuildings and a barn. And it's interesting because, the farming way, you try to make use of everything, right? Every last board, every last piece of wire could be used for something. And while we got ourselves a big dumpster and we're just kind of getting rid of a lot of stuff that, we will never actually use. We will not be horse farmers, just not in our journey right now, as much as I love horses. But, I almost found myself getting into that mindset of, oh, but but this is a nice piece of wood here. This is a really nice piece of wood. Or, we're going to need this bucket. This is a good bucket, you know? And just kind of need to take a pause and be like, but will I ever actually really use this? Probably not, right? Because there's a few other good buckets around here that we will keep. But it just made me think about, different people's life experiences and like even just from a point of survival, right? And how that sort of mindset can get passed on. And there are benefits to it, sure, but certainly it can contribute to having a little more clutter in your life. Anyway, something to think about.
No, I've had a conversation with it was around the time Marie Kondo and her sparking joy stuff came out, and I really got into that. Like I even looked up how to become one of her certified organizers because I was just like,
Oh,
this is amazing.
yeah.
Look at all this joy from not having things, which I feel like makes it sound like I have a very like minimalist house, and that is not the case. My office looks like I don't even know because I have so many things in here. But one of the things I was talking to a friend about who kind of did the same thing where she was like, I'm going to go through all my things and I'm just going to make everything look so nice and neat. And she was saying that because she grew up in poverty and it really going through everything and getting rid of things. Cause she said she started asking herself, like, why do I have so much stuff? And then she said it occurred to
Yeah.
her that like growing up, like there were times where she didn't have enough. And so that fear,
Mm-hmm.
she's like, even though I know it's at times irrational because I make good money, like I'm very financially responsible, but there's always that fear of, well, what if I don't have what I need? So I think that can probably be
Yeah.
something that's difficult, as far as like why people have a hard time getting rid of stuff or they hang on to things. That could definitely
Mm-hmm.
play into it for sure. Hopefully, if you're listening, you learned a little something. Maybe you're inspired to do some spring cleaning and get
Yeah.
organized and make your space calm and peaceful. And if you decide to get rid of some things, maybe you make a little extra cash selling some things. Take yourself on a little treat yourself with your proceeds. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our podcast so you are alerted as soon as a new episode comes out. If there's a topic related to mental health or relationships or parenting or anything in that realm that you'd like us to cover, please email us at dhbhs.media@hitchcock.org. We really do look close at analytics and feedback, and we really want to be helpful and give people what they need. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. And remember, never underestimate the utility of a good bucket.
Thank you for joining us this week. As always, if you'd like more information and support, please check out our site at dartmouth-health.cobalt.care for additional content, connection to resources, support groups that you can sign up to attend, or to connect to one of our clinicians for counseling, psychotherapy, or medication evaluation. We appreciate you listening and hope you have a wonderful week.